Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're going to continue with the updating of the reassembly on the SL125. If you recall, I did the first of these segments here a while back now, where I started to share with you the reassembly of the project. I've done quite a bit to it since that first segment, so I thought I'd give you an update today. I'll do my best not to duplicate anything that I shared the first time, and make sure I don't miss anything either at the same time. And in no particular order, I'm going to start here on the left side. I have reattached the bash plate or skid plate, as you can see underneath there. I've also powder coated and added the foot peg bar that goes underneath the engine with the new rubbers from Honda. You can still get those. I think I mentioned that before. I'm going to cut in here just a few short clips of the powder coating of that foot peg bar so you can see the process. It's not going to be a complete how-to video on powder coating, but it'll give you a little flavor of the powder coating itself of the bar and some of the other pieces that go with it. You can also see here the side stand, or the kickstand as some people call it, has been added as well, along with the front sprocket. That's a new Honda supplied sprocket with a new chain. Side cover right here, the aluminum cover, that's the original that came off the bike. Now, when I polish those kind of pieces, you can, if the original piece, the original alloy aluminum casting or pieces in good condition, you can make that look like chrome, and a lot of people do. In my opinion, that's not original looking. They usually had a nice bright finish like you can see here, but they weren't necessarily to look like a chrome piece. So I didn't put any effort into over polishing that. I brought it up to where I thought it would represent what Honda would have originally done and installed on this bike. So most of this section of the bike now is done, with the exception of the cover that goes over the sprocket right there, and I'll be adding that coming up here shortly. And of course the battery, and let me just move up here a little bit. The battery is not clearly installed, though I do have the battery right here. I typically don't install the battery till very late in the project. I don't like to charge the batteries. It was shipped dry, so I've got to add acid to it and charge it. And I prefer not to install the battery till very late in the process if I can avoid it. And I have to tidy up some of the wiring here, as well as when I put the battery in, I will clean up and finish up some of that wiring that's not quite done. Let's swing around and look at the front wheel here. And as you can see, I've started to install the cables. The front brake is complete, and that is the cable's been completed and tied into the handlebars at the top, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And that has been adjusted. So I think that front brake is at least initially ready to go. I've also added fork oil to both forks and torqued the top mounting plug, or the plug that fits in the top of the tubes, to the factory specifications, as well as torquing the axle nut here. I think you can see it right there, and installed the proper cotter pin or split pin to secure the axle in place. Let's now swing around to the opposite side of the bike. There's a couple of things I'd like to talk about there, and then we'll move on to the handlebars. The most obvious thing on the right side of the bike is going to be the carburetor is finished up and installed, along with I finished up tying in the air boot right there. I think we talked about that air boot a bit in the previous episode, but that's completely installed, along with the throttle cable. Let me, you can hear it. I think you can hear the throttle slide. I think I've got that all buttoned up. I've also added right here a clip that secures that high tension lead coming down from the coil out of the way. That is original. That's a new NOS part that Honda does show in their parts diagram. This bike did not have one when I got it, but I did find one. I sourced it and added it, as you can see there. The other major add on this side of the bike was the brake system. The brake pedal, of course, down here has been added. Let me reposition the camera just a little bit. So the brake pedal has been added, along with a linkage going to the rear wheel, and that is, at least has an initial adjustment. I'll have to tune that later on when I get the bike out and get it running. And I added the brake light switch here. You can see, I think, right there, along with the spring that controls the activation of that switch. Now this was an interesting assembly here. Let me zoom in on that for you right there. You can see how that is arranged. That spring coming down, let me get my hand in here to point to it for you, right there. That spring coming down right there hooks underneath the brake pedal return spring right there. And it took me a little bit to figure that out. It's a little bit different arrangement than I've seen in the past. And initially I thought that spring that connects the brake pedal to the switch itself connected somewhere to the brake pedal, which is probably more common. And the spring length didn't seem to be correct. It just didn't seem right. So I sat there and pondered it for a little while, and then I went back and looked at the parts diagrams from Honda, and it clearly shows that little spring coming down, hooking underneath the bottom, like that, of the large return spring. And once I realized that and fit it in place, it worked perfectly as I would have expected. I did test that switch with my multimeter to make sure it is working, and it is. So I'm pretty confident that switch is working, as well as, by the way, the front brake switch, which is installed on the handlebars and the handle grips. We'll talk about that again, excuse me, more in a moment. What I'm going to do now is lower the bike down to a little lower level, and we'll talk about the handlebars, the controls, the meters, which has also obviously been added. Before I move on to the handlebars and the controls and meters, I want to just briefly talk about these cables. So the tack cable and the clutch cable, and they are attached up above at the handlebars and the meter. And I just have them hanging there for now until I can get around to adding the side cover, the right side cover, to the bike. And I have to do that before I can add oil, of course. That clip right there, that metal clip you see, that's attached to the tack drive. That tack cable will come down and terminate in this side cover, and is what, you know, there's an arrangement in here with a pinion gear that drives that cable that drives the tack. That little clip right there will clip around the frame, the down tube there, just to keep the cable off and keep it from rubbing on the frame. That is original to the bike, by the way. That actually was on the bike when I got it, so I just replated it, cleaned it up, polished it, and it's just waiting to be installed when I get around to adding the clutch cover. Now let's go ahead and talk about as you can see, I've got the handlebars and the meters installed along with the controls. These are complete. In other words, they're all done. There's nothing further to do here. New grips, those are aftermarket grips that I picked up. They weren't terribly expensive. The controls themselves, we've talked about in some detail, are original. The levers and the perches are aftermarket, along with the adjusters. Those are new, but they're aftermarket. Aftermarket cables, we already discussed those a bit. Aftermarket front brake switch, that's what you see right here. And we talked to some degree about this control as well as how I had to repair that kill switch to work. Handlebars are mounted in their correct position according to those dots that are stamped into the handlebars themselves. I also talked about that before. And of course the meters are now mounted in their correct position. You're seeing this from pretty much the operator's view right there. And everything there went together smoothly. I did not have any problems with any of that. And I think it looks pretty good, actually, to be honest with you. Quite pleased with the way everything came together and how it all turned out. You can see it all there. And of course, this nut has been tightened. I don't remember the torque setting anymore. I think there was one published for that, and I did tighten it up to the appropriate torque. You have to preload those bearings in there a little bit and then back off just a touch. But I do believe there's a torque setting for that, but I couldn't swear to it. Let's talk a little bit about the wiring. There's the backside or underside of the 2 meters, and you can see I just have the wiring right now hanging down, along with the wiring coming up from the rest of the bike right there. That'll all tie together up inside of the headlight shell, and that gets mounted, which will be quite a bit later on because I'm going to paint it first before I bother with all of that. The other thing that I did was reroute the main wiring loom coming from further back in the bike. If you recall before, I had it coming underneath here and up, and it didn't seem right to me, so what I did, and I really couldn't find any photos that were helpful in this regard, though I did do quite a bit of searching for photos that would illustrate this. So I went with just my best guesstimate of what I think probably happened. Is Honda took this main loom up underneath this bracket here that holds that coil assembly and condenser in place. I ran it underneath that, and as you can see, it'll come up something like that when everything's done and tie up into the headlight shell. I think that's right. If anyone has any advice for me, feel free to offer, but I think that's probably close to how Honda originally routed that main wiring loom. At this point, I think we're going to call this video a wrap. We're getting real close to finishing up on this project with what I can do, and that is I've got to finish the assembly of the right clutch cover, and I might in fact do a video on that. I'm not sure yet. I have not done that as of this recording. I might do a video on that showing how, the assembly of the mechanism, and I have to mount that of course on the bike before I can put the oil in the engine. I have to put in or install the cover here over the chain. I can do that pretty much anytime I want. And there might be a few other little odds and ends. I'm probably going to leave the seat off until a bit later on. Mount the battery, clean up this wiring in here. A few things like that. The exhaust system has to be painted yet, and I can't do that until it warms up. It's still way too cold outside to paint outside. I'm not going to paint that in an enclosed heated shop. And of course the tins or the bodywork, I've talked about that in some degree. It'll be quite a bit later on before I get to that. So it won't be long here. Another few videos probably will have gone about as far as we can go on this. I do have to check for spark also. I've not done that yet, so I've got to get power to it in order to check for spark. And it's very possible this project will go on hold for a while until I can get the tins painted, and then we'd have to come back later on, probably in the summer, and we'll do a wrap-up and show the project complete. But there'll probably be a few more videos out of this before it's over, and then we'll move on to something else for a bit. I do have a couple things in mind in terms of what's next to start up on after I have to set this one aside for a while until I can get to the paint and get that finished up. So as I said, this is going to be it for this video, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.